Okay, so the dollar clearly at a level of resistance. The bonds clearly very overextended now to the downside in terms of the Bollinger Band. So now, how much more lower can we drop on the bonds? And how much longer is it going to take until the dollar gets a bounce? All right, so that's basically what we're going to be taking a look at. That and also Apple and Amazon reported earnings that affected, obviously, the market overall. And we're also going to talk about why I'm currently long the IWM. All right, so without further ado, let's get started with the video. So Apple just reported earnings a bit higher, a little bit higher than the expected. So it didn't really outperform. So that caused Apple to drop in the after hours. And also revenue fell 1.4% year over year, making the third consecutive period of declines. The $3 trillion tech giant offered further insight into the global consumer demand in another window. Posting 8%. Services was a bright spot, beating projections and posting 8% growth from the year ago period. So now revenue 81.8 versus the 81.55 expected. So it didn't really beat that much. EPS 126 versus 120 expected. And revenue obviously didn't meet expectations. And just overall didn't really outperform that much. So it caused the market to drop a little. So thankfully we could clearly see this piece of crap outside of the lower level of the Bollinger Bands. It looks like it's currently going to drop that much, or maybe if it opens at this level, it'll be outside of the lower Bollinger Bands. And that would finally signify this uptrend finally not holding and falling. All right. Amazon reported really good earnings. It's actually the best earnings report in since 2020. So Amazon reports blowout profit, beats on sales, and issues optimistic guidance. Double-digit revenue growth, with the company posted its biggest earnings beat since its report in the fourth quarter of 2020. So 65 cents on the share versus 35 cents per share expected. Revenue was 134 billion versus 131 billion expected. And AWS was 22.1 billion versus 21.8 billion in revenue, advertising 10.7 billion versus 10.4 billion. So Amazon is up pretty substantially in the after hours. And it reported record earnings basically after they cut a lot of jobs. So that's basically causing that's holding the market up at the moment, Amazon. So we can see here currently Amazon is up almost $10 in the after hours. So clearly, that's keeping the NASDAQ up. So Apple obviously is bearish. Amazon outperformed and did really well. So that's the reason why the NASDAQ is still teetering basically at this level of support. It hasn't broken. It's still holding near where it closed. Otherwise, if Amazon did not beat, then the NASDAQ would be much lower here. And basically Amazon did well. Apple didn't. Now, the next things that we really need to take a look at, the most important things, are going to be, now that earnings are over, basically, for these large stocks, we need to monitor the dollar and we need to monitor the bonds. So basically now, right, the upward momentum on the dollar is continuing to move up. the slow acting MACD line is clearly curled up here, right? You can see that it's curled up. So this is good for bears, right? It's showing that the dollar has strength, right? But what we need to see is how much more strength can the dollar have? Because we're also getting very close to the upper level of the Bollinger Band, and the upper level of the Bollinger Band is pointed sharply down. Okay, does that make sense? So if it continues at this pace, then within 1 or 2 days, the dollar, if it continues at the upward pace, coupled with the downward pace of the Bollinger Band, it's going to take 1 or 2 more days until the dollar begins to trade outside of the upper level of the Bollinger Band, starting to signify things are very overextended. So if things become very overextended on the dollar, then that would set up for a drop in the dollar, which would cause a bounce in the stock market. So as we get closer and closer to levels of resistance on the dollar, there becomes an increasingly larger chance that the SPY and the overall market is going to get a bounce. So that is that for the dollar, right? We're getting close to levels of resistance. And that's why I got into we got into September 15th calls for the IWM, I believe. So there's that, right? And the bonds are also very, very important. And they're basically showing, so the bonds are important because they have a more correlated relationship to the market. When the bonds are very, very overextended like this, right? You could see that it's getting very overextended to the downside, very similar to what happened back in June, right? Which was signaling the bottom in the overall market, that I was saying, look, guys, this is going to be the bottom of the market because the bonds are it's starting to get very, very overextended, right? And then what basically happened on the bonds is that there were 2 days that we opened outside of the lower level of the Bollinger Band, which was basically signified very, very large overextension, right? So this candle right here that we just see on the bonds right now, the Bollinger Bands are, you can see the lower level of the Bollinger Bands are very, very high compared to where we closed, right? So if we end up opening tomorrow outside of the lower level, this should signify a bounce. But then if we continue to fall even more, then this would also be like in a really, really crazy like these next few days. Basically there's really like two days, I think, until we get some sort of a bounce. If we don't get a bounce tomorrow, then it's going to end up happening either Monday or Tuesday. And this is all right. So look, this is basically what I'm looking at on the bonds. All right. So tomorrow, the Bollinger Bands are going to be down here, right? They're going to be a bit into this candle. And if we open here, right? If we open down here, this is going to be, we're opening outside of the lower level of the Bollinger Band. Okay. So if we end up bouncing a bit, so again, the Bollinger Band is down here, right? If this next candle for tomorrow bounces a bit and closes within the Bollinger Bands, then that's very bad. Okay? Because then that would mean that there's even more room to fall to the downside. And because then we would have one day that we close outside of the Bollinger Bands, and then the next day we opened outside, but then we bounce back inside. So we're not overextended to the downside anymore. Does that make sense? So then Monday, so if that were to happen, then Monday we would be trading within the Bollinger Bands, and then we have even more room to fall lower, because by Monday, then in this circumstance, the Bollinger Band would be back down to like 120.1 potentially, right? And then we could have an even bigger move to the downside on Monday, based on the Bollinger Band being even lower. So does that make sense? So that's why I'm saying there's maybe like 2 or 3 more days left because then if that happens, if we get a really, really big move, then that would be like the perfect opportunity to go long. But yeah, so this is basically showing like another 2-3 days of downside before a potential bounce. But I bought into some longs here earlier, depending. And that basically also coincides with the analysis on the dollar. There's really just 2, maybe 3 days left until we get very, very overextended. And then once we start opening and closing outside of the upper level of the Bollinger Band on the dollar, that would coincide basically with opening and closing. That would coincide with the bonds. All right. So I hope that makes sense. All right, so this is a daily chart of the Russell. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys my thought process of why I went long a bit on the Russell with a nice little 10-15% stop loss. So this is a trend line from back in August of 2008, and as you can see, just scrolling all the way back, this is the beginning of Basically, this is the top level of wedge that was started back during the 2009 crash, right? So we started over here, right? And that level is basically where we are today, right? So very simply, just going long at support on this trend line. The other reason why I went long on the Russell was I did not expect Amazon to have blowout amazing earnings, and I wasn't expecting Apple to do spectacularly well also. So I was expecting both of them not to have spectacular earnings, which would cause the NASDAQ to not get that much buyers, and more buyers would end up coming into the Russell. That's basically what my thought process is for why I took the trade. But currently, you know, Amazon did really, really well, obviously. So it's causing the market to just be held up here. So that is causing the SPY and the NASDAQ to do well. And it's not giving that many buyers into the Russell at the moment. So basically, you know, if the dollar retraces from here, and if the bonds bounce a bit from here, then you know, it's going to cause the IWM to really you know, get like a little baby bounce. We'll see. But that's basically my thought process why I went long the IWM. I didn't want to directly take a long or a short on the NASDAQ. So because it was, you know, dependent on how earnings went. But yeah, September 15th calls. I think, you know, it's worth with like a 10% stop loss, nothing too crazy. But yeah, I think regardless, if it doesn't work out, then we can just lean short in terms of day trades. But yeah, regardless, you know, we're at a major level of support, obviously on the SPY, 447 and 445, major levels of support on the SPY. So we need to see if that holds. The NASDAQ, it looks like it's bouncing in the after hours. Tomorrow, a major level of support is going to be the lows from the initial breakout candle at 370. So this whole 370, 372 area is very important on the NASDAQ. And of course, the IWM, basically today's lows are important on the IWM. So, you know, there's the entire rundown. Depending on which direction we're leaning towards tomorrow, you know, it should be interesting to see what happens. But aside from that, you know, should be good to go. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and I'll see you guys probably I'll make another video on Sunday, and then I won't be streaming tomorrow morning. All right, so yeah, I'm gonna post the video on Sunday. All right, so take care, have a good one.